Hello, fellow humans. It took me 3 books to get on board with the idea of degrowth, but it was not until September last year when I read 2 books by Tim Jackson that I fully absorbed the word degrowth. Immediately, my worldview has changed. I would like to talk about Tim Jackson's ideas and how I am a changed human today because of them. Is degrowth asking us to become farmers or to return to the pre-industrial age? Absolutely not. Degrowth is calling for prosperity for all humans without going over the limits of what Earth can provide. Here's what Tim Jackson writes in Post-Growth, Life After Capitalism. Good lives do not have to cost the Earth. Material progress has changed our lives in many ways for the better. But the burden of having can obscure the joy of belonging. The obsession with producing can distort the fulfillment of making. The pressure of consuming can undermine the simple lightness of being. Economic growth, as it is understood today, is almost identical to GDP growth. The gross domestic product is a number in dollars, euros, yuan, or whatever currency that measures how much is produced, how much is earned, and how much is spent across the nation. This one single number determines the success of an economy and hierarchy among nations. Robert Kennedy, who once ran for President of the United States, said about GDP that it counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm and counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. The lesson here is that how we measure economic life matters deeply. The effect of measurement is warping our thinking, making us believe that because something is measured in money, it is also valuable and worthwhile. GDP has created a myth around itself that is believed religiously by governments, politicians, and mainstream media. Business needs to grow, the stock market needs to grow, wealth needs to grow, the quantity of money needs to grow. Okay, so this perpetual desire for growth clearly looks like a fetish. Just as a small child throws a temper tantrum if the favorite toy is taken away, so does capitalism see growth as the only thing that matters. But is capitalism actually growing according to its own desires? In the UK, the oldest of the developed economies, the picture is particularly striking. From a peak of around 4% in 1968, the trend growth in labor productivity had already fallen to less than 1% before the financial crisis in 2008. In the aftermath, its descent continued. In the years before the coronavirus crisis, there was virtually no growth in labor productivity at all. Sometimes, most strikingly through the pandemic, productivity growth went into reverse. Labor productivity declined in absolute terms across the economy as a whole. Did all this end capitalism? Not at all. If you look at the pocket definition of capitalism as the strong relation between ownership, power, capital, and profit, we see that capitalism is alive and well. However, it has morphed into new flavors. Woke capitalism, Chinese capitalism, Dubai-like capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, capitalism with a purpose. These new incarnations are the children of the political freedoms that were born in the deregulation frenzy of the 1980s. This frenzy was satirized in Serious Money, a 1987 play by the writer Carol Churchill. The play was a savage, breathless indictment of high finance. At one point in the play, one aggressive trader insists, "We're only doing just the same all you bastards always done. New faces in your old square mile, making money with a smile. Just as greedy, just as vile." Where does this greed go when labor productivity is so low? It will squeeze wages. It will increase prices. It will increase conflict between the capitalist class and the workers. It will increase exploitation of cheap labor. 1972 was the year when the Club of Rome published the now famous The Limits to Growth report. Since its publication, it sold some 30 million copies. The report concluded that Without substantial changes in resource consumption, the most probable result will be a rather sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. This conclusion was utterly ignored by President Ronald Reagan, who simply declared that there are no great limits to growth because there are no limits on the human capacity for intelligence, imagination, and wonder. Rocket billionaires still believe this to this day. In their minds, the expression must go on forever. No room left on Earth? Great, let us trash Mars, the Moon, Alpha Centauri, and why not? Let us take capitalism to the entire galaxy. It is moral, it is just, it is natural to have centibillionaires, trillionaires, and quadrillionaires as long as the universe can handle us humans. Until we escape Earth in spaceships made from titanium or recycled plastic, if we run out of titanium, we have no choice but to make peace with Earth, achieve a stable climate, so we don't disappear before Vulcans send their invitation to visit. Can we overcome our restlessness? Can we transform this can-do attitude loaded with testosterone that pushes us to break limits that should not be broken, to exploit what should not be exploited, to expand business that should not have a reason to become empires? How can we turn the impulse towards limitlessness into a desire for sufficiency? The standard Vulcan greeting is live long and prosper. Prosper here is a verb. It's a process. It's a state of being. What is prosperity then? What does prosperity mean to you? Think about it, especially about the very first image that comes to mind. Is it something about material possessions? Is it the ability to buy whatever things you want, to travel whatever you want and whenever you want? In some sense, prosperity is the material expression of happiness. Tim Jackson writes, looking at happiness inside the richer nations reveals some even more curious findings. Over time, the average level of reported happiness within a country really doesn't tend to change that much. In the US, for example, the General Social Survey reports the average happiness scores haven't changed by more than 5% between the highest and the lowest values since the mid-1970s. There was a very slight 2% rise in happiness between 1976 and the early 1990s. Since that time, though, the average happiness score has fallen by around 3%, and this has happened even as the economy has more than tripled in size. In other words, getting richer on average hasn't helped Americans to get happier at all over the last 4 decades. Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen argued that neither money nor utility can bring us a reliable guide to the quality of life. Prosperity depends on the capabilities of humans in society to flourish and function well. Social progress is the perpetual increase of those capabilities. Tim Jackson proposes that prosperity can be cast in terms of health. Beyond physical health, people crave love of family, friendship, attachment and belonging, security and safety, a deep sense of home. Humans yearn for individuality, including in cultures with a collective tradition, such as China. Individuality lives on a large spectrum of perception. Regardless of culture, all humans live life with a sense of self-awareness and desire to preserve this sense. This is how Tim Jackson illustrates prosperity as health, human functioning in 5 domains: sexual, spiritual, social, psychological, and physiological. Prosperity is when all these dimensions are in balance with the self and with the material world. For many humans, chasing prosperity has become a sport. We have evolved to cope with an environment where calories were hard to get. Capitalism has turned evolution upside down, overloading us with calories, all stemming from the same core motivation to maximize profit. Fast food and kilometers of shelves with frozen and artificial food saturated with sugars and fats did not appear to satiate our hunger and thirst. They appear to satiate capitalism, without even questioning for 1 second that capitalism is insatiable. As Tim Jackson writes, the bigger the economy, the higher this cost. An infinite economy, the ultimate end of eternal growth, means infinite depreciation, infinite maintenance cost, an infinite need for available energy to turn back the tide of entropy. At the end of the day, the myth of growth is a thermodynamic impossibility. The language of business and economics abounds with metaphors and figures of speech. We need calm markets. Competition is about survival of the fittest. Success is about creating value. These phrases and many other similar ones that you see repeated by capitalists are meant to maintain the story that makes the system intelligible. We live and think according to the stories we hear and create for ourselves. Very few of us can think only in terms of numbers, data, and disaffected logic. Take, for example, the metaphor of the survival of the fittest. Evolution is a random selection of the most adapted organisms. It has no mission and no purpose. So the story in capitalism goes, look at nature, how it operates. So us humans must operate the same in society. Everybody for himself. Make a corporation, buy labor of those who do not have a choice, get rich, eliminate competitors, build a rocket, escape Earth. It's only natural, so the story says. The anxiety to survive is the energy for the story. If you do not struggle with all your power, you cannot survive. Nature as struggle, profit as a competition, consumption as insatiability, this is the unholy trinity of a Darwinian capitalism. And here is where it breaks down. Here is why societies are not following the rules of evolution by natural selection. Authors David Graeber and David Wengrow have given many examples of civilizations that thrive in cooperation without tyrannical leaders. Their work demonstrates with archaeological data that human nature is neither hierarchical and competitive nor egalitarian. Human nature is a wide spectrum of experience, experiments, and stories. Capitalism does not have a monopoly on storytelling. The stories we hear from capitalism, which are of the lowest quality ever told, are only a small fraction in the large panoply of stories ever told. How did we end up with bullshit jobs, with low-paid, unskilled workers, delivery and distribution warehouses, gig economy, $8 per hour, $15 per hour, 0-hour contracts with no holiday or sickness benefits? Where is the prosperity promised by the leaders of the 1980s who shouted to give capitalism more freedom, and in return prosperity will trickle down to all of us in rivers of honey and gold? We were promised more free time, more leisure, more enjoyment of life. Instead, we got longer hours and demand for more labor. This is not the work that has value for quality of life. Work itself, the allocation of attention, the application of skill, the dedication of effort, can bring its own intrinsic rewards. Our immersion in the task can lead, under the right circumstances, to the highest and most intense forms of fulfillment that is possible for humans to experience. Both work itself and the world it creates are vital to healthy psychological and social functioning. Labor is when work is used by capitalism to tell its story of growth. Labor is what it becomes of work when it's paid by a capitalist. With or without labor, capitalism needs to grow. If it cannot find cheap labor, capitalists will invent self-checkouts, robots, automation, whatever it takes. The promise of prosperity should return to putting again value on work, not labor, on what is actually socially useful, on what brings life satisfaction for each and one of us. We can have prosperity without capitalism. There are many stories of hope. We hear about care investments, homes, hospitals, schools, ecological food provisioning. We hear about creative investments, communal spaces, meeting places, artistic venues that provide durability of human cultures. We must never forget, we do not exist without culture. We do not exist without stories. The greatest hope of them all, I believe, is when we recognize the greatest injustice of them all and we proceed to offer reparations to this injustice. And here it is. In 2015, advanced economies have taken from the developing countries 12 billion tons of embodied raw material equivalents, 822 million hectares of embodied land, 21 exajoules of embodied energy, and 188 million person-years of embodied labor. All this worth $10.8 trillion in northern prices, enough to end extreme poverty 70 times over. From 1990 to 2015, drain from the developing countries totaled $242 trillion. This drain represents a significant fortune for the advanced economies, equivalent to a quarter of their GDP. This injustice continues today. The wealth of us living in rich countries is largely stolen from the developing countries. They are giving us huge financial aid, not the opposite. The hope is to end this injustice. Stop extracting materials. Stop taking land. Stop taking energy. Stop paying workers poverty wages. It is possible. It can happen. It will happen. Who has the power to do all this? In an earlier video, I suggested we should replace capitalism with a well-being economy. One of the elements of capitalism is power, which is the ability of capitalists to rule over others. Power is different in the hands of the state because the state operates on principles of political representative democracy, at least so it should, while capitalism has no built-in principles of representative democracy. This is how the state had the power to rescue the stock market, to bail out big banks and big industries in 2008 and 2020. Governments printed trillions of dollars and euros to save capitalism. Almost all capitalists stopped worrying about deficit and begged for money. This shameless hubris does not recognize that governments who have sovereign money, like the dollar, actually have an unlimited pocket. They can create as much money as they want. They do not have to collect money from taxes in order to spend them. It is the opposite. They create and spend money first from thin air, then they collect taxes. But the government does not need the taxes. Taxes merely exist to create a dependency between the government and the economy. Taxes are a story invented to create an economic identity and an economic belonging to a nation. We belong to a nation because we pay taxes to the government of that nation. With the same power, governments of the global north can erase the debt of the global south and increase the peace, increase the justice between rich and poor, powerful and powerless. Prosperity without capitalism will mean new definitions and boundaries of power. If governments did not have unlimited power to print money for armies and wars, if people had power to create their own local currencies based on democratic principles, we would live in a very different world. And as a side note about Bitcoin and so-called stable coins, they failed to deliver prosperity for all humans. They failed to improve lives. They created new paper oligarchs, new speculators, new ways of wasting energy. They did not increase the peace and did not increase democracy. They increased excitement to get wealthy through yet another nifty win-lose scheme. In the last chapter of the book, titled Dolphins in Venice, Tim Jackson writes, "In the ruins of capitalism lie the seeds for a fundamental renewal. More is not always a virtue. Struggle is not the only basis for existence. Competition is not the only response to struggle. Drudgery is not the only reward for labor. Productivity doesn't exhaust the return to work. Investment is not a meaningless accumulation of financial wealth. Denial is not the only response to our own mortality." Just 1 month into the COVID lockdown, 85% of Brits surveyed wanted to see at least some of the personal or social changes they have experienced continue afterwards, while just 9% want a complete return to normal. 2 years later, in 2022, two-thirds of workers might seek new jobs if forced back to the office, according to a global survey. What is the meaning of seeing dolphins in Venice? Perhaps it is a glimpse into a near future where we slow down, connect to Earth, and enjoy life. A future of prosperity without capitalism for all humans, not just a select few. Next time, instead of a pandemic, we can design the change ourselves. This is what post-growth is about. Post-growth is only a softer name for degrowth. In conclusion, fellow ladies and jelly spoons, here comes a radical statement. If your corporate job is propping up the growth engine of capitalism, you are wasting your time. If you have to deliver more sales, more return on investment, more clients, for no reason other than to grow the business, you are part of the problem. You do not have to do this. There is an alternative to the growth mentality. The choice happens in your mind when you start believing one story over the other. It is never late to turn your back against capitalism and join us on the road towards meaningful prosperity. Thank you for watching all the way. I said at the beginning that Tim Jackson's books changed me. His books launched a train of thought that made me start this YouTube channel. I believe our way of life will change fundamentally within 10 years. If you feel that my video essays are helpful and wish to support my independent work, you can buy me a coffee or become a monthly Patreon. I very much appreciate it. Until next time, be brave, live long, and prosper. Click here to learn more.